And I'll be your host today. Today, I have Paula Gair here from deriskme. She is not only an expert in cybersecurity, she's also an educator. So that's why I love having her on, because she's easy to understand in an area that most of us don't have that much knowledge in. And we're going to be talking about the 30-minute cyber action plan. So really easy tips for you to get yourself in order. Of course, I'm expecting to leave here, just a new human, Paula. No, I'm just kidding. I know it's going to be a great session because you always provide. So thank you so much for joining us here today on Digital Boost.
Thanks so much for having me, Anamari. You've got me there. I'm not on mute.
I do.
Yeah,
It's fantastic.
Great. Yeah, so I'm really happy to be here. Gosh, it's Tech Week. I know everyone's got a really busy week coming up. So thanks for people making the time to come along today. We're going to try to make this pretty fast-paced and focus on the practicalities rather than getting into anything too technical. So basically, this is really a session that's aimed at anybody who needs to take some action in terms of cybersecurity for their business, irrespective of their own sort of levels of technical ability. So you don't need to be an IT person necessarily. These are things that we should all be able to take some steps on. So one of the things I hear from people a lot is that there's a real challenge with people having enough time to put into cyber, and I totally understand that, right? When you're running a business, you are basically both working in the business and on the business at the same time, and it is really tricky to dedicate this time. So that's why I wanted to focus on what can we get done in 30 minutes. Some people may have attended the previous session where we looked at what actually goes into your sort of risk analysis. So we're just going to recap on that slightly, and then we're going to jump into the specific actions. And what I hope that people will leave with is an idea that when they have the time, this is the next action that they need to take. So let's all be practical and pragmatic. You're not going to sit down and necessarily spend days at a time sorting out cybersecurity issues and challenges, but let's work on the basis that when you do have time, and what I like to do is I like to diarize 30 minutes a week and just say, okay, what's the next thing on my list? And then just cross that off. And that way, rather than never getting around to it and feeling like you've got days and days of work, you can take those 30-minute slots and get the practical steps in place. So let's just recap. So the first stage from an action plan is a bit of an audit, right? Basically, you've got to figure out, what do I have? What could go wrong? And then what steps am I going to take to mitigate those risks? And I just really recommend that everybody goes into this with this mindset of being pragmatic, focusing on action. You might not get it absolutely right. There's always more we can do in terms of cyber, but doing something is definitely better than nothing. And so I'm going to go through with you today the things that I think should be in everybody's action plan. And some people may have done some of these things, but it's a really great starting point. Now, for your own circumstances of your business, you may wish to add some other things. And I'm going to give you 3 tools that you can use to go through and figure out what sorts of things might be appropriate in your specific business circumstances. And then I've got a whole lot of resources and links available for people at the end as well. So just recapping on what risk is, right? So to risk something is to put something valuable or important in a dangerous situation in which it could be lost or damaged. So obviously, whoever wrote this wasn't thinking about cybersecurity, but certainly, these definitions, certainly the last one, the possibility of something bad happening, certainly does apply to cyber risk. So I want to show you 3 different tools to start off with. The first one is a business cyber health check, and this is something that only takes 3 to 5 minutes to complete. It's been developed by CertNZ, and it's a really great, quick way to go through 6 quick questions and get some specific actions that you can take, that you can put into your action plan. So let's just have a look at what this looks like in practice. We're going to go through and do a version of the health check. So we click on Get Started. It's very straightforward. So this is the sort of format. As you can see, really quick and easy. You don't need to go away and do any research to answer these questions. So, and as you can see from the 6 questions that are there, that gives you a good indication of what CERT would prioritize as the sorts of things that should be in your plan. So, how often do we install security updates for our software and devices? So security updates are important because often they include security fixes. So in an ideal world, what we all do is have auto updates set up, and you will either get a notification to say there's an update available and you click to accept and run that update, or you may have it even set up to run overnight. So let's say when there's an update available. So 2FA is second factor of authentication, and we are going to talk about passwords and 2FA, often called MFA, multi-factor authentication. So essentially, it's another thing apart from just the credentials of your username and password. So if your username and password was to be compromised and a hacker did get hold of it, without the second factor, they still wouldn't be able to log in. So 2FA is one of the most important things that we can put into our action plan to reduce cyber risk. Usernames and passwords on their own are just not secure enough. So again, you can see that this is designed for people of all different levels of expertise and experience. So, you may be saying, well, what is 2FA? Or you may be saying, well, I've heard about it, but I haven't quite got round to it yet. Or yes, we use 2FA for our business. So let's say we've heard of it, but we don't use it yet. Data backups. Now, as long as businesses have been running, way before things were digital, having copies of things were important. It's no less important in the digital age. And in many ways, it's become really confusing. How do I do these backups? A lot of our business information is now in the cloud, so sometimes there's an assumption that it's backed up there. We can't assume that that's the case. It depends who the provider is and what sort of contract you have with them and what sort of service level agreements you have with them as to whether or not your information is backed up. So this is a really good moment to pause and think, well, hang on a second, how do I back up my information? We often use many, many different types of systems, all at the same time. So again, thinking about where that business critical information, maybe it's customer data, maybe it's financial information, where is it and how is it backed up? So yeah, so I might say in this case, I'm not sure, it's been a while since I've backed up, I think. And password policies. So as with two-factor or multi-factor authentication, passwords are really critical. Passwords, unfortunately, are one of the real weak points for many of our accounts and devices and networks. So having a password policy and an approach to passwords will really, really help. It helps you be more efficient as well, because you're not constantly needing to go through the password reminder process. But essentially, a lot of us just rely on each individual person working in our business, or whether it's for ourselves to just sort of follow the advice that we've had in the past. And so it might be that we think, oh yeah, we change our password regularly, but password policies should include things like not reusing passwords. That's a super, super important thing. If you reuse passwords, then if there is any kind of data breach where the username and password is compromised, it's possible for a hacker to try to use that for another account. So Zoom had this experience when it felt like in the early sort of days of COVID, everybody seemed to be moving on to Zoom and Teams. What hackers did is they took a whole lot of publicly available information from other data breaches and tried this with Zoom accounts. It's called credential stuffing, and they had a great success rate at actually getting into people's Zoom accounts, because of course so many of us were suddenly having to set up the Zoom account, and then all of a sudden we think, oh, what password should I use? If you're not using a password manager and you don't have a policy and process in place for creating passwords, then you may well be tempted to use something you've used in another account. So let's say that we don't have a password policy, but we trust staff to manage their passwords properly. Right, last two questions. Is your business prepared for a cybersecurity incident? I mean, I would have to say that for almost every business, the answer is probably no. It's scary. B, we don't really know what we're preparing for. There's so many different types of cyber risks out there. So I imagine that most businesses are going to say something like, I'm not sure, but we've got our data backed up. A lot of people do also think that maybe due to the nature of their business that there's not much risk, but cyber risk affects everybody. So I think no one can probably answer with option one. So let's say, yes, we keep backups. Okay, last question. Have you set up logs for your website? So effectively, Logs is where we are keeping track of what's happening, you know, what access is coming into our website. And you can also set up logs for other types of IT systems as well. So, but maybe that's a new concept. So let's say, what are logs? And let's click show my results. So what we'll see when we scroll down, first of all, we can get a copy of this emailed so we can access it later. But then each of the 6 areas that you've answered questions on, you'll get a response. Okay, and you can see that you've got a sort of a score out of 5 as well. So in terms of security updates, I'm getting a 3 out of 5 here, and CERT also providing links to find out more. So multi-factor authentication, again, another link to tell you more about multi-factor and how it works, a little bit about backups, etc. So this is a super simple, quick, easy tool that you can do, and you can also get anyone else in your business or organization to do, as a way of starting to think about cybersecurity and getting that sort of mindset going. So like I said, it's a super simple way. There's no technical knowledge required, and it will give you some really important points to start to take action on, so you can put these things into your action plan. So you know, I really recommend that's a really good place to start. Now we've got another couple of tools that we can have a look at. These two actually come from the UK. So Cyberaware is part of the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK, and again, 3 to 5 minutes for sole traders and small businesses, or you can do the individual and family action plan. Again, you'll see that there's an area of crossover between these plans, which is what we would hope to see, that the key and the most important areas of cyber risk and actions are being highlighted. So let's just jump in and have a look at what we can do when we're looking at this from a small business perspective. Okay, so does your business have any employees apart from yourself? So let's say yes, 1 to 9. And it's really important when we're thinking about people that have access to our business systems that it's everybody who might have access. You know, maybe you have an intern who's doing social media work for you. Whether or not they're paid or unpaid, we should still think about them as having an employee. The important thing is actually about what they have access to. Here we go, backups coming up again. So obviously this is really critical. When you think about it, for your business to keep running, there are certain things that you absolutely must have. So there's lots of different ways of backing things up, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's buying a hard disk and keeping a copy. Gosh, you know, if you've got a limited amount of customer data, you may even decide to keep a printed out copy of that information as well. I wouldn't recommend that's the only thing you do, but you know, there's lots of ways of keeping access to that information. So backups coming up for us again. Strong passwords. So you can see that these same themes are coming through here between CERT in New Zealand and also NCSC in the UK. So strong passwords. We're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like, but a strong password is ideally something that's either generated by a password manager, or it's something that is, say, 4 random words. That's actually much harder to guess. And I've got some other resources that we'll share at the end, but one thing that's really interesting to know is that words like password are often used as passwords. So hopefully if you do start using a password manager, you can make sure that you don't fall into that trap of using the obvious. They're obviously very easy to be guessed. So do you use a strong password? Let's say not sure. And you know, often with cyber and taking action, it can be really tricky because we just don't know. And it may be because things are constantly changing. So it's okay to say not sure. I would say when I'm going through these sorts of action plans, err on the side of caution. So again, coming back to issues around passwords, about making sure passwords are unique. So yes, we do know that we have unique passwords, so that's great. So here in the UK, they're calling it 2-step verification. That's the same as multi-factor authentication or second factor authentication. It's all the same thing. It's essentially an additional thing apart from just your username and password to access important accounts. So let's say I'm thinking about this. I think, well, I know I use it for most things, but I'm not sure if I use it for everything. Okay. And then it's asking you to think about what sort of devices you use. And increasingly, you know, we don't have that same separation of business and personal that we used to. We often use the same devices. Even if we have an office, we might use the same device on our home network. We may use it for personal use. Maybe we have a tablet and we let our kids use it to play games. So it's a lot blurrier than it used to be, where people had a desktop computer or even a work laptop and they were kept quite separate. We also do a lot of business on our phones these days. So essentially thinking about a combination of things is important, because we need to take different steps to protect each of those devices. Now, this is a really interesting thing as well. Do you have the following security features turned on? There are lots of things that are inbuilt into our devices now, or into the accounts that we set up. And I would really encourage you, from a cybersecurity mindset perspective, to use all of those inbuilt security features. So yes, it might take you a second longer to open your device. Obviously, if you just pick up your phone and you don't have to do Face ID to unlock it, or you don't have to put a PIN code in, then it's going to be quicker by a fraction of a second. However, it means that everything that's on your phone is potentially available to everybody to see. So when you think about those things, think about it in the same way that you would as, say, locking the front door of your house. We do those things because if somebody just wandered in, that potentially could cause all kinds of problems, and at best a mess, but at worst, a whole lot of things may go missing. So all of these things are available to us. We've got screen locks. We can use things like passcodes, Face IDs, fingerprint IDs. Definitely do use those for all of your devices. If you're working on a laptop, you should have your laptop set up so that when you walk away from it, you lock the screen, so there isn't a possibility that somebody can sit down and just access what's there. I still see that in cafes, for example. Someone gets up, leaves their laptop unlocked and goes off to get another cup of coffee. It really only takes a second for somebody to jump in and cause you some problems. Firewalls and antivirus. So again, these are two other things that are inbuilt and offered in many instances now. So in the settings of your devices, you can go into security and privacy areas and see what are the sort of default options that are available. So what I say they're default in that they come with the device, but usually they're not switched on. So you need to go through the process of switching these things on for yourself. And of course, there's always third-party software that you can purchase as well. But as a minimum, start with what you've already got on your devices. So I'm not sure whether I've got those things switched on. And this question about up-to-date software, this is really important because, as we just said previously, a lot of security fixes are pushed through in those updates. So, if you have an iPhone, for example, and you've got auto updates enabled and your phone's plugged in and connected to the network overnight, it will just install for you, and that's great. And the reason that it's important to do that is that if there is a security fix, you don't want to delay getting that security fix in there. You can click through and see what's in the update, but I recommend that it's just good practice to accept those updates. So again, let's say we're not sure about that. Again, work devices, these can all be set up differently. And if you didn't set it up yourself, you may not be sure. So if you're getting a push notification to prompt you to install an update, then you should do that. And if you can set up the automatic updates, then that is obviously useful. Now, if you work in a business that does have an IT department, they will have a way of setting this up, and you need to follow the guidelines that you've been given in your business. So again, let's say we're not sure about these updates. So we've all heard of viruses and malware. One of the ways that this ends up on our devices is the software that we install. So it's really important that we only install legitimate software. It's super easy for hackers to get us to install software by giving us something that looks really useful and interesting and free. So we often don't check the source and we go ahead and update. So the two main app stores are obviously the Apple Store, App Store, and then there's the Google Play. Now, there's a lot more malware on Google Play, but don't assume that just because something's Apple that it's 100% safe. So just check the source. You can, in your Apple devices, also go through and see what apps are accessing what things in terms of locations, photos, contacts, etc. And that's definitely something that is a good idea. So do I check? Let's say I always check. So that's good. I've got that one here. So what I get is some really clear recommendations, also with some urgency associated with them. So I'm being told here I need to back up all my important work information, turn on auto backups, and I've got some really useful links to tell me how to do that. There's really good information here that then tells you that it's not just important to have a backup, but you need to be able to recover that information. So sort of sounds obvious, but a lot of times we tend to sort of set and forget things and not necessarily test that backup. So as you can see here, we've got a whole lot of really good information that is provided to us in a very, very sort of simple format. Again, it's not technical, but it provides links if we're not sure how to take the actions that are recommended. So I would recommend both of these as really, really useful tools. And I've included a third one that we're not going to go through now because it's much more detailed. So the UK have a scheme called Cyber Essentials, which is a scheme that you can actually get a sort of self-certification or include an IT service provider to help you with that certification for your business. But before you do that paid Cyber Essentials self-cert program, you can go through and use this Cyber Essentials readiness tool. So it's free to use, as are the other two that I've just shown you. And it will go through and it will ask you again a series of questions. You'll be prompted with answers to see what level of readiness you have. So if you want to jump into things in a bit more detail, I would recommend this third link. They're all there in the slides, which we'll be providing to you after the session today. But as a starting point, those first two very simple ones that are 3 to 5 minutes will give you a good idea of the things that you need to do for your business. So I have a document here which I'm going to run through with you, and then we will make a copy of it available to everybody that they can make their own copy of. Essentially, this is a cyber action plan, and this is what you can get done for yourself in 30 minutes. So I've got some grayed out text in here, and you can obviously go through and edit and add and remove things, but this is just to get you thinking about what sorts of things should be in here for your business. So as we said, when we're looking at risk, the first thing we need to do is figure out what have we got. So I've divided this into 3 main areas for you. So the first thing is devices. You know, what do we actually have? And the obvious ones are phones, tablets, computers, but think about also Internet of Things devices. Could be anything from a smart speaker to an internet connected printer to a security camera on the front door. You may also be running your own servers. You know, for a lot of businesses, almost everything is in the cloud, but that's not the case for everybody. So you may also have your own devices, your own servers. So think about devices as things that are actually physical things, sort of hardware. And then the second thing is where you're going to have a lot. These are the systems and applications where your data is actually stored. So again, I've included some of the things that would be business critical for many businesses. So maybe you run your business email through G Suite. So you have a Google account there. You'll have business email, could be using some other provider. All businesses will have access to a bank account. And your business probably has a website, and you may manage that through a content management system. You will probably have a customer database, and you may do some email marketing, which may be linked to your email to your customer database or your website, or it may be separate. An accounting package like MYOB or Xero, and of course all your social accounts. Now, as you're sitting there, you can probably think of a whole lot of other business critical systems and applications and places that data is stored. So jump into that middle column and update that for yourselves. Now, networks. There are multiple networks. So networks are important because this is how the data is being transferred from one place to another. So security around networks is a really important piece. You may have Wi-Fi in your office. You probably also use your home Wi-Fi for business when you're working from home. You may use mobile data. So when you're not connected to Wi-Fi on your phone or your tablet, you're probably using mobile data. You may even use your phone to create a hotspot. You may access a network when you're at a client's office or supplier's office. And of course, there's always public Wi-Fi, so cafes, airports, hotels, malls, etc. So all of these things can be used to transmit data, and we need to make sure that that our access is secure. Otherwise, the data can potentially be intercepted. So, one thing I'm not focusing on a lot today is the types of risks, and that's for two reasons. One is that with cyber risk, it can be incredibly tricky to be able to figure out your exact level of risk from certain things. What's most important to think about is the fact that there are so many different risks. So what we can do is we can identify the things that we think may be a particular issue for us. But more importantly, if we take steps to develop an action plan that mitigates as many risks as possible, then we will be putting ourselves in the strongest possible position for our businesses. So effectively, it's not a one-to-one relationship between risk and mitigation. So what I mean by that is when we think about good password management and adding things like two-factor authentication and multi-factor authentication, we're potentially mitigating a large number of risks. Okay, so it may not be that, so you might take one action, which is why we can actually get a lot done in 30 minutes. We might take one action and that may mitigate a large number of risks. So I've just included a couple of risks here. If you've got specific things in your business that you think could be a concern, then please do add those in there. But, some of the big things that are happening at the moment, there's a lot of phishing, there's a lot of ransomware. There is always issues around different types of hacking, device, network or account compromise, malware, viruses. And I also wanted to add privacy and data breaches, because you will have seen the acting privacy commissioner in the press probably last week talking about this issue. Effectively, privacy and data breaches happen all the time. Sometimes they're deliberate, but they're often accidental. So thinking about how we store our data and who can access it and what could possibly go wrong is definitely something that you should be building into your mindset around cyber risk. So what I've got here is some of the key things in terms of mitigation. So we're going to go through these in a bit more detail just now, so you can these can form part of your action plan. So CertNZ produce a list of critical controls. They update it every year, and these critical controls are the top 10 things that if they were in place, the majority of cyber incidents would not have occurred. So again, it's that one-to-many relationship. If you put these things in place, you may be mitigating and managing a large number of cyber risks. I also want to show you Have I Been Pwned, which is a play on being owned. So essentially, this website has a notification option. So if your email address ends up in a data breach somewhere, you'll get notified. So, I often say cyber security isn't really set and forget, but this is one of those examples that you can actually set up and you get those push notifications if your email address is in a data breach. And you can do this with all of your business email accounts, with your personal accounts, etc. So it's a one-off setup, and it really will be beneficial for you over the long term. I've also included a link here to passwordmanager.com. So if you are not using a password manager, as the top thing in your action plan really does relate to password management, I really recommend now's the time to bite the bullet and to find one that's appropriate for you. There are free password managers out there, and you can make an assessment about whether they have got the features that you would want. But if you are paying for a password manager, you're likely to be paying in the region of $3 to $5 a month per person. So they're not particularly expensive, and they are well worth it. It means that your password manager can generate a super secure password for you. The data on your password manager is encrypted, so it is held securely. And of course, when you set up your password manager, set it up with a second factor of authentication. So even if your unique, long, strong password for your password manager was to be compromised, without that second factor of authentication, a hacker could not access your password manager. So, and what I'm suggesting is that if you think about what we've got at the top here, where we've got our devices, systems, applications, and networks, when you're setting up a strong password for one, it can also be a really good time to do that account security and privacy checkup. So say you're thinking, okay, I really need to set up for my accounting package a good long strong password with a second factor authentication, it's also a good idea at that point when you're in there changing that password to do the account security and privacy checkup. So, that way that you're covering off all the aspects to do with your Xero or MYOB account all in one go, and you can tick that one off the list for now. Backups and recoveries we briefly touched on, and I really want to encourage you while you're getting this rolling, rather than think, oh, I'll get to it next week, diarize 30 minutes to do as much as you possibly can on a weekly basis. So, within 30 minutes, you should be able to put together your action list, and then you're going to need to put those things into practice. So I recommend, putting that in for 30 minutes a week, and you'll be surprised, but in a very short amount of time, you'll end up with those actions being well and truly underway, and the priority areas will have been acted upon. So here's what I think should be in your action plan. And again, you'll get access to this document so you can edit this for yourself. I think doing your cyber risk audit, which includes filling in the template above and then going through and doing 1, 2, or 3 of these reviews is a really, really good idea. And then translating the outcomes of those assessments into your action plan. So I'm going to go through with you now what's in CERT's critical controls for 2022. And you may have some other things that come out of your own thinking about the uniqueness of your business or from those questionnaires above. So let's jump in and have a look at CERT's critical controls for 2022. So as I said, the critical controls do get updated each year. And the whole idea is that if you had these things in place, the majority of issues would not have occurred. So patching your software and systems is the same as updating. Effectively, a lot of the reasons that cyber attacks are able to happen is because old versions of software and systems are in use. So patching and keeping things up to date is the thing that you can do. Now, there's obviously things that are outside of your control. There are things that happen where systems that you've kept up to date are exploited, or there's vulnerabilities that are discovered. But oftentimes the vulnerabilities that hackers use to get into systems, there have been patches available for many, many years. So that is definitely something that I recommend that you set up. And again, it can be one of those set and forget things. Now, you'll see the same things coming up over and over. Implement multi-factor authentication and verification. So, and the order of these things does reflect how important they are. So CERT haven't just put them in a random order from 1 to 10. This is basically some sort of prioritized order. Again, when we're talking about going in and, for example, updating your password, say, let's take your accounting package as the same example again. When you do that security and privacy checkup, looking at the settings, that's also where you'll see that you can set up automatic updates or push notifications for updates. So if you do it on a prioritized basis for the accounts that are most important for your business, you'll be able to get these things all set up at the same time. So strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, patching, and providing and using a password manager. So again, CERT do provide good information about password managers and how they work. I recommend the site I've included for you, passwordmanager.com, if you want to read more and you want to get questions answered about how secure they are and how they work. Now, the first thing that on this list that may end up sounding a bit technical is configuring, logging, and alerting. So what I would suggest is that when you're going into the security settings on your different business critical systems, see what you can switch on in terms of logging. If there's an option for any sorts of logs to be created, then switch that on. But anything that is beyond that, if you're working with an IT provider, then that's something that you can talk to them about and make sure that you've got all of that logging and alerting in place. Sort of an advanced option of that is having all of those logs all managed in one place. But as a minimum, switch on whatever you can for logging and alerting. So a simple thing would be, for example, if a new it could be as simple as someone logging in from into a system from a new device. So if you know that no one is using a new device, then that would be a red flag that there's something potentially happening in your system that you should be concerned about. So the next option here, asset lifecycle management. Again, if you go back to the template that I provided, and we've got a list of what devices we have, then again, lifecycle management is just thinking about what do I have, where is it, and making sure that you don't just end up giving it away to somebody and it might have important customer data on it or something, or access to important systems. So it's basically having a process to keep track of what you have, and if you are going to decommission, then do that in an organized way. You'll see implementing and backups appearing again, and application control, again, may sound a bit technical, but effectively it is about which applications do you allow to run. So again, as a minimum, it could be that you talk to people that are working in your business or working with you about what they access when they're on your network. But you may also have an option through your IT provider, if you have one, for application control. Again, this sounds technical, but it's not. Enforcing the principle of least privilege effectively means giving people the access they need to do their jobs, and only that. So instead of giving everybody admin privileges, including yourself, do just, when you go into, say, your website content management system tool, when you set up the type of user, do it based on what people need to do. And these things can always be changed. So if you haven't given someone enough access, you can usually go in and change that very, very easily. But essentially, it means that you might say that no one who's working on your website can delete pages, for example. So that means if there was something malicious that happened, you would be protected. However, it also stops accidental things happening. And in the world of cyber and privacy risk, a lot of the things that go wrong can actually happen accidentally. Network segmentation, again, if you have a big enough network and you have IT support, this could be something that's useful for you, but it's worth touching on in the sense that we often are working from home as well. So one thing you can do at home as a minimum is you can set up a guest network. So whoever your internet service provider is, whether it's Spark, Vodafone, 2 Degrees, etc., when you have a look at how your modem or router works, it will have information to tell you how to do this. And the last one, macros. So again, if you are using Microsoft Office, this may be an issue. If you don't use macros, you can just disable them altogether. So again, the links are there for these things. I would say if some of these things are either don't seem relevant to you or are beyond what you know how to do, they seem more technical, focus on the most important things, because everybody is able to set up that standard patching, multi-factor authentication, password managers. So as a minimum, you should be looking at those specific areas. So this is the website that I wanted to just touch on again in terms of notification. So as you can see in the top left here, you can see there's a notify me option. You can include as many different email addresses as you have. You'll receive an email from Have I Been Pawned that you have to click on to verify that you are the email account holder, and then you'll get a push notification if your email has been involved in a data breach. Now, when you're doing this and you find that there has been a breach, again, that should jump to the top of your action list. You should go into that account, change the password. And again, this is a really good opportunity to start using a password manager and to get a really super strong password and two-factor authentication added in. This is the passwordmanager.com website that I talked about. So interestingly, they quote on their homepage, 81% of hacking related breaches involve compromised and weak passwords. So on that basis alone, then, certainly getting on top of your password management is one of the most important things that you can do. Okay, so sort of a final concept really around onions and Swiss cheese. Cybersecurity is effectively a thing that you need to do in layers. And again, these concepts of having multiple layers of Swiss cheese on top of each other till you can't see any holes, or layers of the onion, will be the thing that help to keep you safe. But again, it's not a one-to-one relationship. So there isn't a single action that you need to take to close up a specific hole. Often, one action like good password management and two-factor authentication will actually deal with a lot of different issues. So just to summarize, CERT's 10 critical controls are here. And again, just to bring it all together, the reason that we're trying to do this is, again, thinking about maintaining confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our data. So, that's what we're trying to achieve from a cybersecurity perspective. Easier said than done, I realize. And, the big takeaway I hope from today is just get started. Doing something is definitely will put you in a position that is way ahead of the majority of businesses and individuals, but don't feel like you need to get it done all at once. Start the process, put 30 minutes aside to prioritize the actions you're going to take for your business. And then if you can go back and add in the extra things you need to do, and think, okay, next week I'm going to look at this type of systems. Next week I'm going to look at what customer data I capture. And 30 minutes, we can all find 30 minutes, and then we move on to the next thing the following week. And that means over time you will basically create that sort of onion or Swiss cheese approach to your cybersecurity and data. So Anamari, have we got any questions or comments in the chat?
Not as yet. I'm just floating from platform to platform, but I think that there's some really good advice here, and I love the just get started aspect. I mean, some of you may have joined us for a session that we ran with somebody who has a blog that's in the top 50 for financial blogs, in the world. And because he set it up as a side project, as a little side hustle that he was doing during COVID, and, wasn't working full time in his own business. He just, didn't put a lot of systems in place as far as security, and then ended up getting hacked and then had to build a whole new site. So, now there's some lessons in there.
Yeah, it's really, really terrifying actually when those things happen. It's a really, really horrendous experience for people. And, we all think we haven't got time, but in fact, the amount of time it takes to put things back together again is going to be so much more. And there's no guarantee that you can, if you haven't got, for example, all of your backups in place. If the data gets deleted or you suffer a ransomware attack, even if you pay the ransom, there's no guarantee you get your data back. So, I think, so hopefully these actions are simple for everybody. So let's just do a quick recap for a couple of minutes. And if anyone has any questions, please pop them into the chat for me. So, first thing is figuring out what do I have, and starting to think about what sorts of risks my business may be at. And you can use those 3 action plans or questionnaires as a way of prompting this thinking. In terms of your action plan yourself, jump into the document and update it. But I would say as a minimum, look at those critical controls for CERT and look at the ones that you can put in place. And just remember that, why am I doing this? Thinking about how this fits in terms of confidentiality, availability, and integrity of data and systems. And if you can put in 30 minutes a week, then you will, over the course of time, really get on top of this area. There's always more that we can do. But getting started and doing something is certainly better than nothing. So go into Have I Been Pawned and the Notify Me option, set up this for all of your emails, and that will be a set and forget thing. And then passwords, it's time to start using a password manager if you're not already. You can look at the site that I've included a link to, so if you want to find out more about what's appropriate for you, and prioritize the things that are most important in terms of business critical, so banking, email, socials, things in the cloud, other business critical systems, and any accounts that have already been compromised. And at the same time, add your second factor or multi-factor authentication and check your privacy and security settings. So if you do those 3 things for each business critical account, then they will be in a much more secure state than they are right now. backups and test restoring, check your security and privacy settings, and use the available security on your devices, and set up those auto updates if they're not already going through. And then here's just a few extra things to think about. And this is really about going forward, right? So ongoing, think about physical security, not just digital security. Think about your business processes and the mindset around security, rather than seeing it as an impediment. It can be an enabler. It can be an area where you can make yourself into a more secure, therefore more trustworthy business, which can be really important for customers as people are experiencing more and more breaches. And think about this concept of privacy and security by design. So if you're doing new development or you're working with a new provider, talk to them up front about privacy and security, baking it in, rather than trying to retrofit it later on.
Also, baking it in. That's so good. What a good.
It's so much easier, going back and trying to put it over the top later on is always tricky. So, and I think it's a red flag if you're dealing with a company who doesn't seem to think this is very important or hasn't really thought about it. I would really consider carefully that relationship with them. It may well be that they can get there, but you need to have some other conversations so that they see just how important it is if they're going to be developing systems that store important customer data. Separation of business and personal is really, really important. It's so hard for us because we've all been working from home for most of the past 2 years, but even things like a guest network at home, and separating your device access, so you're using an account that's specific for business, separate email accounts, etc., then that certainly helps. And then just starting to think about privacy and data. So we've done a session separately on this, and I can include the link to those slides as well. But effectively, what do we capture? How we're using it is a really, really important thing for us to be thinking about. And then, last thing, just get started. So, and I've just included a bit more detail about what you need to do in terms of keeping your networks a bit more secure. So I think happy to take any questions or hear any comments or reflections from anybody. We'll share all of these slides, including links to any previous slides as well. Hopefully it's clear that we can get started even without any sort of technical skills, and by doing something we will be in a much stronger position than the majority of businesses. We just don't want to be the low-hanging fruit in terms of cyber risk. So thanks for having me, Anamari.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Paula, as usual. I always love when you come on because you are an educator. You are able to lay things out in an orderly fashion so that we can know step by step what we should be doing. Some great links here. I've popped some of those links into the chats for you. And of course, if you are a Digital Boost member and you tune in on our website, or you tune in via Zoom, you'll get a link to this session. Paula is going to supply me with the slides and some, I believe this document as well, link to this, and you'll be able to access that on site. So once you click on that link, I believe the link comes through within 24 hours to this session, and we should have it up by then. So if it's not there this afternoon, just have a look for it tomorrow morning. But yeah, it'll be underneath. I believe it used to be called Learning Summaries. Now I think it's called something else, Good Learning Guidelines or a Learning Guide or something like that. So it's right underneath the session. We've just recently been changing up our wording for some things just to make it easier for folks. So do reach out also to our support team if you need to, support@digitalboost.co.nz. If this is all kind of gone a bit over your head and you just want to have a conversation with somebody, do reach out to us. We're here to have a conversation. We can even jump on the phone. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and just so that people know, we will make a copy of the action plan available as a make a copy version, so that what you do in that document will be only accessible to you. So we'll make sure there's a view only version so you can see what's in it, and we'll give you a make a copy version so you can make your own copy and get started.
Yeah, fantastic. We really appreciate that kind of supportive material, because I think it's nice to be able to put things down, and I like the little gray things that you can type over. Really just reminds me what goes in this column, what am I looking for? Yeah, but really simple steps, and that's what we need here with cybersecurity. So appreciate it. I'll just double check out online. I can see people watching there, and it looks like we're good. There's no questions still, so I think we're good to go. If you guys think of something later, just reach out. Yeah, so you're very welcome, Loretta. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow. This is Tech Week. We've got some good sessions lined up, but just remember there's a lot of sessions that are happening here in Aotearoa by big providers and suppliers that are all getting involved in Tech Week. It's like a thing, and you can jump on and find out lots of information about what organizations are doing here in Aotearoa to whether it's in digital transformation or skills and knowledge, or helping people to, yeah, like, we're just kind of educating on tech, I guess, this week, aren't we, Paula?
Yeah, and I think it's just great to be thinking about these things. A lot of these sorts of issues do sort of come down to mindset and having things top of mind, because we also want to take the opportunity when something comes up, right? So that's the thing with cyber as well. Something might happen. Maybe you're creating a new online account, so that's the time to take action in that regard, rather than think, oh, I'll just set it up with my usual password and then come back to it later. Because I mean, let's face it, no one's got time. There is no later. We have to do it in the moment.
Build it in from the beginning. Get yourself a password manager. It'll change your life. I have one. I used to be the biggest, offender of the easy password. Now I can get like super creative. I don't have to remember it. Or sometimes it gives suggested and they're like crazy complex, but all I have to do is remember my one password to get into my vault, and I love that. And yeah, like the more you learn about it, the more you realize how important it is. And it's so do at least do something. Something's better than nothing, as Paula says.
Password manager is a great place to start. Absolutely. And it's one of those things people think, oh, it's going to take some time to set up, but the amount of time you will save going forward, you will never have to go in and do a password reminder again, right? Because so many people say to me, I'm always forgetting my passwords. I've got to go through that process, and it's just a major hassle. So a little bit of time up front, spend half an hour on your password manager this week, and then, going forward, you'll save a whole bunch of time.
Here's the goal. And, it'll prompt every time you update a password, it'll update it in your system. Once it's set up in your browser and it's kind of like sitting right there, you don't have to think about it and be like, oh, I must remember to put this in my password manager. It does all that. It's automated. So give yourself a break, So thanks again, Paula.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Have a great day. Ka